For as long as I can remember, I've always been a collector. Whether it was something free, like plastic skippers from Chickadee Snacks or Ziggy finger puppets from Tang, or figuring Panini sticker albums and Smurf figurines, if I was really into something, I had to have them all. Thank God Pokemon wasn't around back then. When I got older, my completionist collector tendencies transferred to all the different toys that I got into. Like most kids growing up in the 80s, my trifecta of toy collecting consisted of G.I. Joe, Transformers, and He-Man. Yes, there were others, but none of them managed to make such a lasting imprint on my childhood as these three lines. Of the three, G.I. Joe was king. Transformers and He-Man were just too expensive for a kid with limited monetary funds. While I had to rely on Christmas, birthday gifts, or pasalubongs, which were basically stuff my dad brought home from his business trips, to get my Transformers and He-Man fix, I could manage to build my G.I. Joe collection with my own allowance. Back then, a single Joe figure cost a manageable 60 pesos, or a little under $3 at my favorite toy store, Nova Fontana. I amassed quite a collection of Joes, about 40 to 50 figures if I remember right, with a decent collection of vehicles, which were mostly gifts, to go along with them. Eventually, however, I did end up outgrowing my toys. Like most boys who grew up, the big three was replaced by the big one, girls. And my collecting habits were satisfied by building up a formidable music collection of tapes and CDs. No, I did not move on to collecting girls. As the years passed, however, I never really stopped appreciating toys, especially with the dawn of the internet. Yes, I am that old that I actually witnessed the dawn of the internet. I would find myself looking at pictures of all the new toys coming out year after year. I would never buy any though, because back then I couldn't imagine spending money on something that I couldn't listen to, read, eat, or flat out use, and that would just end up standing on some random shelf in my room. Then, sometime in 2004, one particular toy line caught my interest. It was called Transformers Alternators. The premise of this line was that these were Transformer toys, not really meant for kids, but for older collectors. They feature the old G1 characters I grew up watching on TV, but this time transforming into ultra-detailed licensed modern cars. And when I say detailed, I mean that their alt modes were complete with car interiors, licensed car logos, rubber tires, and opening doors and hoods with engines inside. To add to that, the robots they transformed into weren't the usual unmoving bricks like the old toys. No, these guys were mostly fully articulated. It was amazing, like the toys from when I was a kid grew up as well. But still, this wasn't enough for me to actually go out and get some, until I saw them in person. It was just another regular afternoon when I was following my then girlfriend on one of her shopping trips through the bowels of a shopping mall called Goldcrest. Ironically, it wasn't Goldcrest where my childhood store, Nova Fontana, used to be located. But while that store closed shop years ago, I chanced upon another toy shop in its place. Seeing as I had nothing better to do, I decided to check it out. And then all of a sudden, there they were, my two childhood favorite Autobots, Sunstreaker and Prowl, in all their alternators' glory. The price for each, about 1,650 pesos or around $30, was enough to deter me from buying them on the spot. However, their image on the store shelf never left my mind and haunted me for days after that. So eventually I caved. Just these two, I told myself. They really are my two favorite characters. They're all I'll need, just these two. Famous last words. It's a world transformed, where things are not what they seem. It is the world of the Transformers, a world of heroic Autobots and evil Decepticons. My introduction to the world of Transformer toys actually didn't start with the Transformers per se, but with the original Japanese line called Diaclone that Hasbro eventually ended up transforming into the robots that we know today. Coming home from one of his business trips, my dad brought home a nice blue F-15 Eagle jet that could amazingly change into a robot. He even came with a tiny little man with magnets on his feet that could neatly fit inside the jet's cockpit. Now, as cool as the toy was, what I found even cooler was this little booklet that came with the toy. It was a catalog of all the other robots that were in the line. As it turned out, my little blue jet was just the tip of the iceberg. There were 2 or 3 more jets like him. Trains, dinosaurs, insects, and a whole lot of cars and trucks that all turned into robots. I was instantly hooked and begged my dad to get me more. Around the same time, my neighbor, who was my age, also got his first Diaclone robot, Maybe our dads were just on the same trip. His was a bright red Lamborghini Countach that also had a little man with magnets and also transformed into a robot. But he had something else. Information about this new cartoon that he rented from Sonic's, which was our local video store. He told me that this cartoon featured the robots we owned, and that his red car robot was a good guy and that my blue jet was a bad guy. And as if that wasn't enough, he said that his robot kicked my robot's butt in the cartoon. This was too much for me to believe. I went straight down to the video store and looked for this supposed new cartoon. At that point, I didn't even know what it was called. Almost immediately, I saw plastered on the wall of new releases a poster of this epic robot battle scene with my jet robot prominently featured. Or at least, I figured he was my blue jet since the poster was a black and white photocopy. Oh yeah, and as for my neighbor's Lamborghini robot, he was there too, somewhere in the background off to the side. Anyway, that was the first time I saw the name The Transformers with their famous catchphrase, "More than meets the eye." I think I stood there staring at the poster for what seemed to be an eternity, trying to soak up every single detail, every single robot. After eventually regaining my composure, I handed in my allowance for the week to rent out a Betamax copy of the Transformers and went straight home to watch it. Almost immediately, I was lost in this amazing world of heroic Autobots and evil Decepticons, with such memorable characters like Optimus Prime and Megatron, the scheming Starscream, and the monotonous Ultraflange, is that even a word? Voice of Soundwave. The cool Jazz, and even the delusional Cliffjumper voiced by a very familiar Casey Kasem. They all made an impression on me that to this day I haven't forgotten. Oh, and it turned out my friend was right. My jet robot turned out to be one of the bad guys, and he wasn't even a main dude, but a Decepticon lackey called Thundercracker. And my friend's car robot really was a good guy, Sideswipe. Although, if you really want to nitpick, it wasn't really Sideswipe that kicked Thundercracker's butt. It was his twin, Sunstreaker. So what does one do when you've got your two favorite characters standing proudly on your shelf and looking lonely? Why, of course, you get your third favorite character to fill in the void. So with that reasoning, slowly but surely, my Alternators collection started growing. My reasons for buying the next robot were always logical, of course. From, why am I displaying my 3 robots on a shelf, obviously meant for 4? Or, let's see, I've got a yellow one, a white one, and a silver and a blue. Yup, I definitely need a red one. Or, this robot always hung around with this other robot in the cartoon. So, and of course, my favorite. Ooh, pretty. Seriously though, at this point, I had begun another hobby apart from collecting toys. After working as a web designer for 6 years, I made an attempt to switch into the field of 3D animation. I enrolled in a school brought in from Canada that offered an intensive 11-month 2D and 3D animation course. I have to admit, it was a very good experience. Unfortunately though, due to bad management, the school closed down halfway through my course. I know what you're thinking. No, it wasn't a scam. In the 5 months that I was there, they really did teach a lot, and we were refunded whatever advance payments we made. The school management really were just a bunch of morons. Anyway, in those 5 months, I learned enough to make a decent Transformer in 3D. And over time, quite honestly, I got really good at it. I was making all my childhood heroes come alive, looking good, and actually rigged and animated to transform. Soon, this 3D Transformers stuff became an obsession. I made my own website and was churning out new Transformers every week. Not to toot my own horn, but I gained a modest following in the Transformer fans community. For a time, when you Googled 3D Transformers, my website would be the #1 result. Type the same thing on YouTube, and you get video compilations of my work put together by other people. My work was also featured in an actual Transformers comic by Dreamwave. Okay, so it was actually fan art on the letters page. But here's the thing, I didn't submit it. They found my work online and asked me if they could publish it. And even to this day, years after my last update, I still occasionally get emails from random people saying how they just discovered my website and how much they enjoyed it, and when will I update again. So, why am I writing about all this? Aside from reliving my past glories, it was this mini hobby of mine that really refueled my passion into collecting Transformers again. I would tell myself that I need to get all these new Transformers to serve as reference materials for my latest 3D project, which was only partially true. Although I have to say, my 3D renditions of the couple Alternators toys that I actually made are some of my favorites and ones I'm most proud of. Within a couple years' time, the Alternators line was winding down and I had a shelf of roughly 20 plus robots. At this point, I had accepted the fact that I was a full-fledged Transformer collector. Well, sort of. By 2007, the first live-action Transformers movie came out, and with it came new toys. A few months before the actual release of the movie, I found myself making the trek to one of the bigger malls in our capital, SM Mega Mall, on a Saturday morning for my first ever toy launch event. For those not from Manila, this was basically an event organized by the local Hasbro toy distributor for Transformers collectors. Before the toys would be released to retail stores nationwide, they would organize an event in one of the major malls where all the new product would be released first. So basically, if you were a serious collector and wanted first crack at all the new stuff, this was where you would go, lining up outside the mall doors to dash in once they officially opened for business. Anyway, for this particular event, I found myself weeding my way through the throngs of other Transformer fanatics. There I was, casually thinking to myself, yeah, these Transformers look too weird, nothing like the originals. I don't think I'll collect these ones. Actually, okay, maybe I'll just get myself a Jazz. When the first Star Wars action figures came out in 1978, I was a bit too young to really appreciate them. Despite that, my older brother did a good job at ultimately getting me all excited about the toys, and so when my dad went to the US on a business trip, all I wanted for pasalubong was Star Wars, Star Wars, Star Wars. The thing is, I didn't really ask for anyone specific. I just assumed that when you asked for Star Wars toys, you'd get all the main guys like Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, and Darth Vader. Or hell, even R2-D2 or C-3PO. So while my dad was away, I went around telling everyone who would listen, from all my friends to even my yaya, or what you would call a nanny, when my dad comes back with Luke and Han, I'm gonna make them fight Darth Vader and the Stormtroopers. It's gonna be amazing. Anyway, after what seemed to be an eternity, the day of days finally arrived. My dad came home and he seemed just as excited to give me my new toys as I was to get them. So there we were in his room and he slowly opened his bag, reached in, and pulled out Dengar! Wait, what? Who? But there was more. My dad was still excitedly pulling out more and more figures. After Dengar came Hammerhead, and then Cloud Car Pilot, and then Bespin Security Guard. Hoth Rebel Commander! Who were these people? Oh wait, my dad was reaching in one last time. Surely he must have saved the best for last. A Luke, a Han, hell even a Leia would be great. And then there it was. Dengar. Again? Yeah, even that confused my dad as well. I guess in all his excitement of bagging me a variant African-American Bespin security guard, like I really knew what a variant was at that point, he probably lost track of the fact that he already had Dengar in his shopping cart. Childhood disappointment was never so properly illustrated in that exact moment. I don't know if my dad picked up on my massively deflated excitement, but to be fair, I didn't throw a tantrum. I think I was more worried about having to face my yaya and show her my two Dengars fight with the Cloud Car Pilot. Anyway, this story does eventually have a happy ending. As it turns out, even if he didn't look like it, I later learned that Dengar was one of the bounty hunters who were assembled to hunt down Han Solo, and apparently was buds with Boba Fett. So, he must have been badass as well. Who knows? Oh, and he had a big, long gun. I was really grasping at whatever positives I could find. While he didn't get it right the first time, my dad did do good on his next business trips, and he eventually did bring home all the heavy hitters. I got my Luke, my Han, Vader, and even some Jawas, and with that, my Star Wars collection was well on its way. When I wrote about my first Star Wars toys, it was all about how I got the obscure bounty hunter Dengar twice. Writing about that made me come to this minor realization, and that was even after I got my Lukes, Hans and Leias, Dengar remained a favorite character of mine growing up. I mean, since I had two figures, at least one of them featured prominently in many of my play scenarios back then, and I pretty much took at least one Dengar around wherever I went. So this got me thinking. Since I'm not really into pure nostalgic collecting, as in getting the actual toys that I grew up with, I started getting curious to see what the updated or modern version of Dengar looked like, and well, I was quite impressed and tempted. So here's how my typical thought process and reasoning went. Hey, that new Dengar looks pretty cool. I wonder how much a second-hand version costs on eBay. Hey, that's not a bad price. But it wouldn't make sense to just get Dengar. Who would keep him company on the shelf? He would need to have at least one display mate. According to Wikipedia, Dengar partnered a lot with Boba Fett. Speaking of Boba Fett, he is such an iconic and cool-looking character. Any toy shelf would look incomplete without him. And he was one of my favorites even back then, so yeah, gotta get me a Boba Fett too. You know, come to think of it, all the bounty hunters were my favorites back then. I wonder how much the bounty hunters are going for on eBay. Wow! Someone is selling a set of bounty hunters? Cool. Yeah, that will work. But just to be clear, this does not mean I'm going to start collecting Star Wars. I can't afford to start collecting another toy line. I will only get the bounty hunters. And just the main ones. You know, the ones in Empire Strikes Back. So there you go. A couple months after writing about Dengar, I have these guys proudly displayed in my room. And yes, I know Greedo wasn't part of this group, but he was part of the set being sold on eBay, so whatever. I'd like to think that had he not been killed off by Han Solo in A New Hope, he would have ended up as part of this group anyway. In 1982, my dad brought me to the States for the first time. I was 6 and had nothing but Star Wars in the brain. That's all I cared about. Going into the fabled amazing toy store called Toys R Us and getting me more Star Wars toys. Surprisingly, my older brother, the same one who got me excited about Star Wars in the first place, was suddenly telling me to forget them. There was this new toy that I should get called G.I. Joe. G.I. what? I thought, what kind of a toy goes by the name Joe? Star Wars sounded so much cooler. But my brother was insistent. I must get a G.I. Joe. So when we got to Toys R Us, he led me straight to the G.I. Joe aisle. Admittedly, I wasn't really that impressed. They were the same size as Star Wars figures, but they sort of all looked the same. All predominantly green men. I don't really think I spent too much time trying to figure out who was who. I just wanted to get my brother off my back, so I grabbed the first Joe I laid my eyes on and dropped it into the cart and headed straight over to the Star Wars aisle. Actually, on second thought, I didn't pick that Joe because he was the first one I saw. I picked him because he was blonde. Back then, Luke Skywalker got me thinking that all leaders were blonde. So I assumed the one that I got was the leader because of his yellow hair color. As it turned out, my reasoning wasn't too far off. I just picked the wrong blonde. Anyway, when we got back to our place, I excitedly started opening up all my Toys R Us loot. Naturally, I started up with all the new Star Wars stuff. But eventually, I came to the lone G.I. Joe that I got. I did a quick scan of the package. The artwork was nice enough. His name was Short Fuse, and he was a mortal soldier. In hindsight, I actually read that wrong. He was really a mortar soldier, not that I'd really know what that was back then. The name didn't really make sense, and it definitely didn't sound as cool as Luke Skywalker or Han Solo. Anyway, I thought might as well open him up. And almost instantly, I realized the action figure I held in my hands was a totally different animal. All of a sudden, everything Star Wars got erased from my brain. This action figure was amazing. He could bend his elbows and knees and twist his waist. Wow! And that wasn't all. He came with accessories. Well, aside from his weapon, which admittedly looked a little wonky, I had no idea what a mortar cannon was. He had a backpack and a helmet that you could remove. And if that wasn't enough, his helmet came with a clear visor that you could actually move up and down. Again, amazing. So after getting over my initial awe of this figure, I quickly picked up the card back which I had previously tossed aside and soaked in every single detail. First and foremost, there was this file card, something no Star Wars figure had. It told the story of Short Fuse, who he was, where he was from, and what his specialty was. It was so detailed that after reading it, I felt that I was best friends with this guy. And then I looked over the other Joes that were available, and what initially looked like a bunch of generic green-clad men slowly turned into the coolest collection of characters that I'd ever laid my eyes on. And all I could think about was, I had to get them all. At this point, I was totally converted. Star Wars was nothing but a distant memory. Okay, so I still picked up an Ewok or Stormtrooper here and there. But basically from then on out, it was all about creating my G.I. Joe Mobile Strike Force. When I was 7, like most kids my age, Christmas really didn't mean anything more than a kick-ass day where everyone got me toys. Yes, I know my parents taught me the real reason we had Christmas, and that was to celebrate the birth of Jesus. But really, for a 7-year-old, that basically translated to, I get more toys. Every year, one gift I would always look forward to receiving was the gift from my ninang, or godmother. First, because I was the only one of my siblings who would receive a gift from her. I mean, she was my ninang after all, so it made the gift more special. And secondly, my ninang always gave me the coolest gifts. Most of her gifts came from Hong Kong, which always had the latest and coolest stuff. Case in point, the year before, she got me this robot. But not just any robot, but a Spider-Man robot. Although it was basically a die-cast brick that didn't come with an actual little Spider-Man to pilot it, and it also transformed to some nondescript flying thing, it was still cool in my book. So this year, as always, I was really excited to see what her gift for me was. What could she possibly get me that would top my Spider-Man robot? So once I had it in hand, I ripped open her gift and pulled out these guys. I'll admit, it wasn't love at first sight, but they did look pretty interesting. They were called Masters of the Universe, which did sound really cool, but I think what got me interested in them was their size. Definitely a lot bigger than your Star Wars or G.I. Joe figure. But boy did they look strange. I mean, Zodak looked nice enough and his title as Cosmic Enforcer sounded cool, but then he had these odd 3-toed feet and a hairy chest. And don't even get me started on Stratos. He was a gray-haired monkey man with feathers in his arms. Nevertheless, there was something about them back then that I couldn't quite figure out. But somehow, I knew that these guys that I held in my hand were just the tip of the iceberg of something special. Like any kid back then who was used to receiving toys packaged inside plastic bubbles, I instinctively turned over their cards and soaked in every little detail. And one by one, I was introduced to the rest of the Masters of the Universe. Skeletor, Beastman, Merman, Man-at-Arms, and of course, He-Man, who ironically looked like the most ordinary of the bunch. And there was one more thing that set these Masters apart from my other toys. Although they didn't come with any file cards like G.I. Joe's, they came with something even better, a mini comic. And ultimately, I think this was what sold me most into the Masters of the Universe line. Although they were mini, I remember their stories to be quite entertaining and not at all simplistic, and the art was gorgeous, at least to the eyes of a 7-year-old. These comics immersed me into their world, and I couldn't wait to get my hands on the rest of the line. Unfortunately, Masters of the Universe weren't as easy to come by. Although I eventually got my main guys like He-Man and Skeletor, my Masters collection didn't grow as fast as my Joes did. A couple years later though, I figured out a brilliant solution to fix my Masters of the Universe shortage. I managed to convince a friend of mine who had a ton of He-Man figures to share his collection with me. So every time he would come over to my house, I would ask him to leave his stuff with me, since we were sharing our toys anyway. Pretty soon, I had almost his entire collection. Of course, little did I know that as he was leaving his He-Man figures with me, he was taking home a couple of my G.I. Joes from under my nose. I guess he thought we were sharing those too. When Hasbro started the Real American Hero line of G.I. Joe, they faced the daunting task of trying to win over kids like me who were hardcore Star Wars collectors. Back then, when it came to 3 3/4 sized action figures, Star Wars was king. But right out of the gate, Hasbro pretty much struck gold by implementing 3 things into their toy line that would set G.I. Joe apart from all the rest, including Star Wars. The first and second were the most obvious, added articulation and accessories. These in themselves were enough to win any kid over. But they decided to go for the knockout punch with file cards. Unlike Star Wars, G.I. Joe didn't have a movie to introduce us to the numerous characters in the line, so Hasbro made the extra effort to make short and detailed write-ups of each character they produced. These file cards had pretty much everything you needed to know about each character: their real names, places of birth, their military and educational background, their primary and secondary weapons of choice, and finally, some interesting bits and snippets about their personalities. These cards varied in their approach and how they would tell the stories about the Joes. Some were quite humorous, like the firefighter barbecue, who is what you would call your basic party animal. He would open up bottles with his teeth, pick up quarters with his ears, and wrap his lips completely around the bottom of a quart Coke bottle. Or the assault trooper Crazy Legs, who could have been the greatest organist in the world if his fingers hadn't been too short. A classical musical enthusiast, he's been known to come rushing into battle with a weird light in his eyes and humming a selection from Johann Sebastian Bach. But others were a little bit more serious, talking about some traumatic childhood experiences, like the Joe Night Spotter Lowlight, who was actually afraid of the dark as a kid, until he got lost in the woods during a hunting expedition with his dad. He was found 3 weeks later with a flashlight, his rifle, and a grin from ear to ear. And finally, Light Infantryman Hit and Run, who was orphaned at a young age and grew up in a county institution from which he escaped with alarming regularity, climbing down sheer walls and running for miles across the plains in the middle of the night. When asked what he was running away from, he replied, "I'm not running away from anything. I'm practicing." He went from the custody of the county directly into the army. And these were just the tip of the iceberg. There were so many more interesting stories that I still remember to this day. To put it bluntly, I loved these cards, and I actually collected them more than the figures themselves. Whenever a friend of mine would get a new Joe, I would ask for their file card until I had at least 3 or 4 times as many file cards as I had actual figures. I even made file cards of the Joes I couldn't get my hands on, usually the vehicle drivers, just to be complete. By this time, I had the Order of Battle comics published by Marvel. These were essentially the G.I. Joe file cards in comic book form. So lifting the information off the comics, I would type up the file cards of Joes I didn't have onto a paper, cut it up into strips, and paste the word strips onto a cardboard cut up into the shape of a file card. How's that for literal cut and paste? So with all these file cards in hand, you must be wondering, what in the world did I do with them? Well, I read them of course, but aside from that, my friends and I formulated a game similar to trump cards. Remember those? Most file cards, at least the Joes, had similar details. Each soldier had a serial number composed of a first, middle, and last batch of numbers, as well as a military grade or rank, and we would use these details to do battle. So we'd split the deck of file cards amongst ourselves and take turns calling out a specific detail from the card we had in play, like first number, and the person with the highest first number would get everyone else's card in play, and we'd keep on doing this till one guy had all the cards. So yeah, nothing overly complicated, basically just trump cards. I was the designated keeper of the cards, a responsibility I took to heart. In fact, one time, the whole deck was confiscated, for no reason, I swear we were playing during a break time, by a teacher in school. I promptly told my parents about it when I got home, and the next day, the teacher gave them back to me, no questions asked. And up to this day, these file cards are the only things left from my childhood toy collections. I just never had the heart to throw or give them away. Anyway, to finish up, I'd like to share a few interesting facts about these file cards I learned over time. From the first year the 3 3/4 Joe line was released in 1982 till the line died down sometime in the 90s, pretty much all the file cards, and we're talking hundreds of characters, were written by one guy, Larry Hama, who also wrote the original Marvel comic run of G.I. Joe, which lasted over 100 issues as well. He's widely considered by many Joe collectors as the godfather of the modern era of G.I. Joe. Many of the Joes were named by Hama after family, friends, and comrades who died during the Vietnam War, and others after historical figures, like the Japanese-American silent weapons expert Quick Kick, who was named MacArthur S. Ito after U.S. World War II General Douglas MacArthur and Japanese Lieutenant General Takeo Ito. In recognition for his contributions, popular G.I. Joe member Tunnel Rat is actually modeled after Larry Hama's likeness. In choosing the birthplace of each Joe, Hama made sure they came from as many parts of the US as possible. To keep track and to make sure no place was over or underused, he had a US map displayed in his workplace, plotting out where each Joe was from. At one point, Hasbro realized that Hama was using names of real people for his file cards, and they wanted in on the action. So for a time, Joe started being named after Hasbro designers and other employees. And they all came from Rhode Island, which is where Hasbro's global headquarters is located. And finally, as for the Cobra Troopers, since the file card wasn't actually about an individual, but about a class of trooper, the birthplace was designated as Various Countries. As a kid, I thought Various Countries was an actual country, called Various. So that's about all I've got on these file cards. So how about you guys? Do any other Joe collectors out there have any fond memories about these file cards? Any particular favorites of the bunch? Go ahead and comment down below. Let's talk Joe. While Transformers, G.I. Joe, and He-Man pretty much ruled my toy shelf, they definitely weren't the only ones on it. There were others. Some of these other toys were pretty obscure and didn't have rich backstories behind them like my big three had. Translation, they didn't have an accompanying kick-ass cartoon. Others, although cool, were rather simplistic and were eventually overshadowed by more complex and exciting toys. And then there were some, well, I had to give up on due to being persecuted by my friends for liking them. Anyway, regardless of the fact that many of these other toys failed to make a lasting impression on me, they were all at one point a source of joy. And for that reason alone, I'd like to give them some recognition. There will be quite a lot, so I originally covered everything in 3 separate posts. So anyway, let's get started. First up, Lego. Nowadays, Lego is a totally different animal from when I was a kid. Things were more simple back then. There were no Lego Star Wars, Batman, or Ninjas. There were no blind bag minifigures or Lego-themed video games either. My Legoland was simple. We had space, city, and medieval, and that was it. And aside from the trees and the ship hulls, nothing was pre-made. We had to build everything. I always go back to the horses to drive my point across. Today's Lego horses look so nice and well, they look like horses. Because they're all basically like action figures in themselves, with simple articulation to boot. Back in my day, we used to build our horses from scratch. They weren't the prettiest looking horses, but in my eyes, they were pretty cool. Anyway, Lego was probably the first toy my dad bought a lot of for me when I was a kid. I guess it was the whole creative aspect of the toy that attracted him to it. After almost every business trip, my dad would come home with a new set or 2 of Lego. But regardless of what type of Lego he bought, the life cycle of each set was always the same. First, I'd get the set, build it according to the instructions, marvel at my creation, maybe play with it for a week or so, but almost inevitably, that set would eventually get deconstructed and all the pieces would be dumped into this huge drawer in my room. And when I say huge, I mean a 2-meter wide, 1-meter deep, and almost a foot high drawer. Imagine one of those filled to the brim with Lego bricks, bits, and pieces. I guess the reason why the sets wouldn't stay assembled long was because eventually I'd get bored with them. They just didn't properly capture my imagination, and I yearned to build bigger things that couldn't be put down in an instruction sheet. I didn't want to just have Lego cars, planes, and boats. I wanted Lego battle cars that had guns and planes that could vault in together to form flying battle fortresses. I wanted monsters, dinosaurs, robots, hell, robot monsters and dinosaurs. I had all these ideas in my head, and the only way I could make them real was through my Lego bricks. And when I was trying to build something specific, I was driven. From outside my room, you could tell I was playing with my Legos because you could hear the crashing and swooshing of endless Lego bricks as I swept arms deep into my Lego drawer, tirelessly looking for that one perfect piece to complete my creation. Good times. As I said in the beginning, today Lego is a totally different animal. I honestly think that today's Lego doesn't encourage the imagination as it used to. Today's Lego is so specific with so many pre-made parts that it would seem like a waste to build anything other than what is illustrated in the instructions. Don't get me wrong, I'm not hating on today's Lego. I think they're amazing for what they are. They just aren't my Lego, which is why I never got back into them when nostalgia drove me to start collecting toys again. Which in the end is probably a good thing, because Legos nowadays are so damn expensive. I'm pretty sure I'd be flat broke. Although, those minifigures look pretty good. Okay, yes, I admit, I liked Care Bears. I actually still do. Honest, I'm pretty secure in my manhood to admit to the entire World Wide Web that I like Care Bears. So there. I first got introduced to Care Bears through this commercial I saw that was snuck in a cartoon bootleg Betamax tape I rented. I guess the bootlegger probably was just too lazy to press pause on the commercials. I think at that time I was really into Ewoks. More on that later. And so these bears kinda reminded me of them. Except these guys were colored and had symbols on their tummies. And I know this commercial was obviously directed towards girls, but what can I say? I was a sucker for small posable bears and bear-like creatures, I guess. I'm not exactly sure how I amassed my collection of Care Bear action figures, because I really don't remember actually seeing them in stores or getting them from my parents. I don't know, maybe I convinced one of my friends to share his bears with me, but I did manage to snag a number of them. And it wasn't just the figures. I totally bought into the whole Care Bear scene. I was into the cartoons and movies. My appreciation for them increased tenfold when I found out that they could shoot energy beams from their bellies. I even remember owning a cassette tape with each bear singing a song about themselves. Even to this day, I can name you the original 10 bears, the 3 other bears that followed after them, and all the Care Bear cousins off the top of my head. I later learned that my extensive knowledge of bears turned out to be an effective way to impress girls. Yup, I was that into them. But I did draw the line on stuffed toys. Now those were for girls. Funny story I remember to this day. My favorite Care Bear was and still is Good Luck Bear. So naturally I had his action figure. Anyway, I also had this other obscure action figure from a line called Lords of Light. Their gimmick was they had a hollow translucent body which you could make glow by putting in one of those green liquid glow sticks. Remember those? They were little or big plastic rods with green liquid inside of them, and when you bent them, they would glow. So anyway, I thought I could achieve the same effect with my Good Luck Bear. So I popped off his head, stuffed a glow stick inside, and ta-da! I had a glowing Good Luck Bear. Of course, that wasn't enough for me, and I decided to take things a step further. I reasoned, if I could break open the plastic tube and slather all that green liquid onto my Good Luck Bear's tummy, I could make him glow. Permanently. Well, it sounded like a reasonable plan, right? So with a lot of effort, I managed to crack open one of the glow tubes and began to pour the green liquid onto my Good Luck Bear's belly. And I rubbed, until his damn clovers started to disappear. Before I knew what was happening, it was completely gone. I was devastated, and from that day on, sadly, Good Luck was just half the bear he used to be. Anyway, eventually, as I grew older, my friends started making fun of me for liking Care Bears. And so I was forced to shove my love, yeah, I said love, for these bears into the dark, deep recesses of my childhood subconsciousness, never to resurface until the day it was safe to admit that, yes, I love Care Bears. But not as much as Transformers, G.I. Joe, and He-Man. Les Schtroumpfs, or better known as the Smurfs, were small and blue and came from a magical forest, or any toy store that would sell them. Other than that, there really isn't much to say about these guys. They weren't really action figures per se, but there were literally hundreds of them, all unique. They had a cartoon show that I watched every Saturday morning, comic books, board games, and even a cereal that would turn your poop blue and red. This was the magical formula for winning over a young collector's heart. Plus, although they were basically little statues, the fact that they were little meant that I could carry a bunch of them wherever I went, and they were cheap enough to convince my parents to get me a Smurf here and there whenever I saw them in some random store. Since there really isn't much to say about me collecting Smurfs, I had a lot of them, I'll just put down some random stuff about me and my Smurfs. I got my first Smurf during a trip to the US. I picked out a masked and caped Smurf out of a sea of blue, thinking he was a super Smurf or something. Back then, we didn't have any of that blind bag nonsense. They were all just there for you to get whichever Smurf you wanted. As it turned out, he wasn't a superhero. He was Spy Smurf. Here's a little challenge for you. Try humming the Smurf theme song back-to-back with the opening riff of Centerfold by the J. Giles Band. While you're at it, try switching between the themes of Star Wars and Superman. Probably my favorite and most memorable Smurf episode was the one about purple Smurfs. There was this little purple fly that bit a random Smurf, and it turned him purple. And insane. He would hop around shouting, "Gnap!" and bite other Smurfs on their tails and infected them too. Eventually, the whole village turned purple. Classic. I think I got inspired by that cartoon and went off to bite my brother as well, in the hopes that he'd turn purple too. If these guys look familiar, they should. Machine Robo was a predecessor of the American robot line called the GoBots. In the same way that Hasbro converted Diaclone into Transformers, another company, Tonka, converted Machine Robo into what more people know today as GoBots. But GoBot toys were never very popular here in the Philippines. For me, it was all about Machine Robos. I got my first Machine Robos from my usual source and supplier of toys and all things good back then, my dad. I remember finding them cool, since they were like Transformers in that they also transformed from vehicles to robots and back again, but their transformations were simpler, and their small sizes made them easy to carry around. Of course, they also came with a small catalog that showed me the rest of the line, and there were a lot. A funny thing I remember was that these robots didn't have any real names other than a code number designation like MR1, 2, and 3, and so on. Of course, back then it didn't occur to me that MR was short for Machine Robo, so I would call my robots Mr. 1, 2, and 3. I was very formal with these bots. Anyway, like I said, although not as complicated as Transformers, these were cool robots, and I did get quite a lot of them. Probably more than Transformers since they were a lot cheaper. So you may be wondering why these guys didn't make as much of an impact on me as Transformers did. I thought about this for a moment and almost instantly came up with an obvious answer. Although the GoBots toy line didn't make it to our shores, the GoBots cartoon did. And quite frankly, it wasn't very good. Okay, most unbiased Transformer fans will admit that the original G1 cartoon was far from perfect, but it managed to do what the GoBots cartoon failed to. Aside from introducing kids to robots, the Transformers cartoon, and later the toy tech specs, introduced us to actual characters, the noble and stoic Optimus Prime, the cocky and delusional Cliffjumper, the treacherous Starscream. I could go on and on. Even my third-string favorite Blue Jet Thundercracker was a Decepticon who wasn't quite convinced by the Decepticon cause, but followed Megatron because he feared him. This was deep stuff for a kid's toy line, but it made these robots more real to me. On the flip side, it was like the GoBots weren't even trying. Each episode featured the same 6 good guys and bad guys, with the occasional guest appearance from some random bot. So yeah, in my opinion, the GoBots toy line died not because they had an inferior product, but because their manufacturers failed to go the extra mile and build a world around their characters. In the end, Hasbro ended up buying Tonka, along with the rights to the GoBots. So now the GoBots are essentially all Transformers. So that's a good thing, I guess. Yub nub! I pretty much wrote most of what I wanted to say about my early days of collecting Star Wars in a previous post. By the time I moved on to collecting G.I. Joes, Star Wars was almost a distant memory. I say almost because I did manage to hold on to some of my favorite characters. And when I say favorites, I don't mean Han, Luke, or Leia. In 1983, when Return of the Jedi hit the theaters, the first time I laid eyes on the Ewoks, it was pretty much love at first sight. I read somewhere that Lucas intentionally invented the Ewoks in order to attract younger viewers to Star Wars. Well, mission accomplished. I loved these guys, and I couldn't get enough of them. I would watch my Betamax copy of Return of the Jedi, as well as the two Ewok movies that followed, Caravan of Courage and The Battle of Endor, over and over again, just to see my favorite Ewoks. The initial line only offered 4 distinct Ewoks: Wicket, the Star, Logray the Medicine Man, Teebo the Scout, and Chief Chirpa, Chief. Later on, they added 2 more, Warok and Romba. These guys made up my Super 6, and I would take them everywhere I went. They didn't fit in with any of the other toy lines though, but I didn't care. They stood out on their own. Years later, when I started collecting toys again, I made it a point to not collect Star Wars. Simply because there were just too many lines out there already, and I wouldn't know where to start. Although I did occasionally get tempted to buy just some random Jedi or bounty hunter here and there. Anyway, a few years ago, Hasbro released a new and improved Wicket action figure. I went back and forth on this, but eventually I decided, I guess one new Ewok wouldn't hurt, and promptly bought him. Shortly thereafter, they released a new Logray, and then an Ewok 2-pack, and then a 5-pack. I guess at this point, you know where all of this is leading to. I hate you, Hasbro.